Okay. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, I declare open the high-level plenary session on economics of disaster-effective financial instruments to reduce risk, organized in cooperation with the Asian Development Bank and the Inter-American Bank. Nearly two-thirds of government report having specific allocations for disaster risk reduction in their national budgets. But greater incentives are needed to encourage private sector spending and to persuade households to protect their investments. This session will be moderated by my sister and friend, Ms. Rahida Degam, columnist and senior diplomatic correspondent and United Nations Bureau Chief for Al Hayat, the leading Arabic daily. Ms. Degam, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Madam. It's a pleasure to be in your company, and particularly in Geneva, as we see each other always in New York. We have heard a great deal about why it is important to invest in disaster risk reduction. Evidence from the Global Assessment Report yesterday was very clear. Just as the world was grappling with the fact that 2010 was a record in terms of losses, with damages tripling 2009 totals, it now seems that this year's economic losses will be even higher. In the first quarter, Japan, one of the better disaster-prepared countries, lost $300 billion to an earthquake. New Zealand watched $8.5 billion disappear after an earthquake, while Australia surrendered $9.5 billion to floods. Compare this with the period from 1995 to 2004, during which disasters were responsible for $570 billion in losses globally. Weather hazards accounted for 71% of large-scale economic disasters, 69% of the economic losses, and 90% of insured losses. It continues today. Now, we have the opportunity to look at how to invest in risk reduction. In some countries, regulators' instruments send the right signal. In other countries, incentives are provided. The role of the public-private partnerships has emerged as an important source of support in delivering services that help communities and countries to become more resilient, to avoid damages, limit exposure, and to rebuild more safely. We've brought together a diverse panel to help us to better see the range of options that are available and how decision makers are mobilizing the resources to deliver results. It really is a very impressive panel, and I will make sure that we will have an interactive session that we will include you, hopefully, in the discussion, because we would like this to be more of deliverables, if you will. We would like this session to have you leave this room saying, I'm taking something with me, I've learned something, it's recommendations that I can take home and see how can I build on it. Let me start with Mr. Nazri Aziz, Minister in the Prime Minister's Department, Malaysia's Dato Seri Muhammad Nazri bin Tan Sri Abdul Aziz is a Malaysian politician from the United Malays National Organization, UMNO, and is, as of 2008, a minister in the Prime Minister's Department in charge of parliamentary affairs and natural disaster risks. In this capacity, he is responsible for coordinating all ministries in disaster risk reduction and emergencies. Welcome, Mr. Minister. Malaysia has been credited with what was called clever instruments for risk reduction. We know about the smart tunnel that was built recently, I believe, and designed. It's only not to be resilient, but also to itself reduce the risks. I understand that you have also developed innovative two-way alert system so that the messages can come from the top down and from the bottom up. How has the Malaysian government First, how has it financed these efforts? Second, what role did the private sector, if any, play in the financing and otherwise? And thirdly, how did those private partnerships develop? How are they? Are they doing well?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, SMART, S-M-A-R-T, is an acronym for Stormwater Management and Road Tunnel. This is a project under the federal government initiated to alleviate the flooding problem in the Kuala Lumpur city center, which is the capital of Malaysia. The project is implemented under the Public-Private Partnership, or PPP, initiative between private company MMC Corporation Berhad and Gamuda Berhad with the Department of Irrigation and Drainage Malaysia and the Malaysian Highway Authority as the executing government agencies. The SMART system is able to divert large volumes of flood water from entering critical stretches prone to flooding in the city center via a holding pond, bypass tunnel, and storage reservoir, thus reducing the flood water level and preventing spillover at the Klang River. Although first mooted as primarily to mitigate recurring floods in the city, the dual-purpose concept was born from the ingenuity of the project proponents. Thus, the motorway tunnel was integrated into the system to relieve traffic congestions at the main southern gateway to the city center. A sophisticated and modern flood detection system, the FDS, provides real-time flood forecasting information. This enables the efficient and safe management for operating the tunnel. For the safety of motorists, the motorway traffic is unidirectional, and safety features such as ventilation shafts, cross passages, fire extinguishers, and air ventilators have been incorporated into the design in compliance with international and Malaysian standards. This project has been a great challenge for the local engineers involved in the management and construction of the project as it runs below congested roads, near sensitive structures, and through very geological ground conditions. The Smart Control Center is in operation 24 hours a day. Once high flow is measured at the confluence, the control center will send a signal to the motorway control center to evacuate traffic from the tunnel. After ensuring the road tunnel is cleared, the traffic compartment will be flooded. Once flood has receded, the tunnel will be cleaned and open to the public again. Now, with the completion of flood mitigation projects done by the City Hall Kuala Lumpur and the government, most of the major flood problems had been overcome, although not fully and always in controlled scale. In terms of the benefits of the SMART project under the PPP initiative, the total cost of building the tunnel was shared between the government and the concessionaire. The total cost was USD 650 million. Now, how we shared the cost, the government paid USD 440 million through private funding investment and deferred payment for the stormwater portion, whereas the concessionaire paid USD 210 million through private funding investment and private funding, and that is the part of the highway portion. Now, through this initiative also, the government was able to, one, ensure fast implementation of the project. It started in January 2003 and we finished in July 2007. Two, it reduced flood and traffic congestion. Three, it was a Malaysian dollar 1.933 billion boost to national economy. Four, of course, it boosts Malaysia's image. Five, there is a reduction of annual flood damages. And six, it benefits flood victims. And also, how we finance this, because for those who use the tunnel, they have to pay the toll, and it is income-generating project, and as such, it is self-financing. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Minister. I'm sure that we're going to have much interest by the other panelists in this very innovative project indeed. Let me introduce Ms. Kristalina Georgieva. She is a European Commissioner for International Cooperation, Humanitarian Aid and Crisis Response since February 2010. From 2008 to 2010, Ms. Georgieva was the Vice President and Corporate Secretary of the World Bank Group, directly reporting to the President. She served as an interlocutor between World Bank Group senior management, its board of directors, and the 186 countries shareholders of the World Bank Group. She held different positions in the World Bank, including Director, Strategy and Operations, Sustainable Development. As part of this last position, she was in charge of overall directions and delivery of World Bank policy and lending operations in infrastructure, urban development, agriculture, environment, and social development, including coordinating of World Bank support of fragile and conflict-affected countries. In the academic field, Ms. Georgieva, a Bulgarian national, was a visiting professor at the University of the South Pacific, Fiji, and at the Australian National University. Commissioner, can you give us an idea of the scale of the European countries' overseas development aid, and what are you doing to ensure that the funds you provide to assist developing countries are reducing, in fact, risk to natural hazards? And I would like to remind all the speakers that the opening answer is no more than 4 minutes at most. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we have to share.
Now we have to share. Be my guest.
This is a very important session. It is a session that focuses on the economics of disaster risk reduction. And it puts in front of us some tough questions, how we know that we're doing the right thing. And that is the question you're posing to me. So as a background, I'm very proud to be an European. I mentioned that this morning, and now I would elaborate why. Europe, as the European Union, is built on the principle of solidarity. And we very strongly feel that we need to apply this principle also in the way we interact with the rest of the world. That translates in what Europe does for development cooperation. We are about 20% of the world economy, but 50 to 60% of development assistance. And then not only we try to do our job in helping people around the world, but we also try to figure out ways in which to make development more resilient. So the question is, are we successful in that? And the honest answer to that question is we have a long way to go. And I want to explain why and what we plan to do in 2 minutes. First, if you look, one can say development is the best way to increase resilience. Yes, this is true. But in a large number of countries, some 30 to 40 countries around the world, disaster risks are the most important factor that can undermine development. And they require to be addressed with measures that specifically help these particular countries' risks to be understood and to be dealt with. Today, out of the 50 billion that we spent on development cooperation, only 0.5% goes straight into disaster risk reduction. And we believe this is not good enough. We believe we should do more. And for that reason, we focus on 3 things. First, work with countries that are disaster-prone to understand their risk profile and help them have better risk assessment and integration in their own development policy. Second, make sure that investments we support are disaster-prone, that they can resist disaster, so we don't build the road and then the flood comes, road is gone. And third, we believe that there is a huge opportunity for the world with the efforts to address climate change. We have already committed through Europe 7.2 billion euros for addressing vulnerability to climate change. We think that we can work all together to make sure that this climate action is one that makes development, especially in the most vulnerable countries, stronger, delivering better results for the people there. Thank you.
So, since we're sharing, so let's go this way.
Keep
So,
sharing.
do you think that you are thinking of any putting conditionality on your aid so that you make sure that it doesn't inadvertently increase the risks and rather than deal with the problem?
Question of conditionality is one of the most difficult and controversial because you impose the wrong conditionality, you may be actually undermining ownership of your development programs. You may be blocking progress because it's your program, not the program of the country. And yet, yes, we believe that we need to look at funding with an eye to, is this funding going to contribute to the well-being of people because it strengthens resilience or not? And we are thinking of this first to do it at home in Europe. In our own programs, we are now in a process of designing what we call multi-year financial framework. In other words, the funding for our own member states. And in this funding, we are saying, okay, if you want to have access to financing for infrastructure, show us that this infrastructure is going to be resilient to climate risks. And I would be very much interested in the views here. We believe that it is irresponsible to people to not very carefully assess what a particular funding program would do in the long run and to what extent it can sustain risks that are now becoming more profound.
Thank you. Sorry. Thank you very much. Maybe we can later, the panelists and the audience, think of whether there are any ideas you might have to contribute to mechanisms of such conditionality. Let me now introduce Mr. Woo Chang-um, Deputy Director General of the Regional and Sustainable Development Department of the Asian Development Bank. Before his appointment as Deputy Director General, Mr. was the Director of the Sustainable Infrastructure Division of the Regional and Sustainable Development Department. Mr. portfolio of initiatives include clean energy, energy efficiency, sustainable transport, water supply and sanitation, urban development, carbon finance, and information and communication technology. Prior to his responsibility as the Director for Sustainable Infrastructure Division, he led a team of professionals to prepare the Nam Theun 2 hydroelectric project in Laos, PDR. He is also an Asian Development Bank's focal point for dams and development, as well as for the mega urban development projects. Mr. is South Korean national, has an MBA in finance and international business from New York University, and I say New York because I come from New York, so that's why he gets that mention. And then, of course, he went to Boston College for a bachelor's in science degree and computer science. Mr. the Asian Development Bank provides both technical cooperation and financial assistance for sectoral development and disaster recovery programs as well. In your view, has this institution succeeded in ensuring that the development assistance of ADB reduces actually the hazard risk? And what evidence do you have to back up that it does, if you have such a view?
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers for having us to speak at this very important panel. Let me start with answering the question. Not yet. We need to move from being traditionally reactive to a much more proactive organization in terms of dealing with these kind of issues. Now, ADB has been around for the last 40 plus years, and just in case if you don't know what ADB does, we are sort of the merger of the sort of UNDP and HSBC. When you mix the two together, we become ADB. So we do worry about development and financing at the end of the day. And over the last 40 years, we've done some remarkable work in terms of development in our region. But disaster and climate change has come up as a very, very important challenge that we must deal with much more proactively. But unfortunately, up to this point, many of our mission leaders and development practitioners, including myself when I was doing this project in the past, looked at disaster as something as an afterthought. As a result, we become much more reactive, and as a result, we don't properly channel the funds in a proper way. And we also don't channel the funds in a timely manner because we are thinking about it afterwards. And oftentimes we think about when the disaster hits, we try to mobilize donors' resources, and we cater more to the donors' priorities as opposed to the needs of the developing countries. So, but we do have a huge role to play in this space as multilateral development banks. And we do need to continue some of the ex-post work, for example, providing contingency credit and emergency assistance. But that's not enough. We need to bring this up forward, and we need to work with the countries, developing countries, and when we develop our country strategy and program, to make sure that the disaster is very much in the forefront, so that we can plan this ahead of time. And we also need to really push the integrated disaster risk management concept, where we promote the whole of the nation framework in disaster risk reduction. And we also need to bring in much more, be more inclusive in terms of bringing the stakeholders, not just the development agencies, finance ministries, but the civil society as well as the private sector. And again, in this connection, ADB is putting a lot of focus in bringing the knowledge of the private sector as well as financing as well. So some of these things I mentioned we need to do in the future, but not yet, so we need to implement these.
Thank you very much. I will now introduce Mr. Oscar Ortiz. He's mayor of Santa Tecla in El Salvador. He has served in that position since year 2000 and was a new mayor at the time of the earthquake there. He used the opportunity of the reconstruction to introduce a new model of development. He's also active in building associations and local authorities. Mayor Ortiz, are you well set with the translation? Yes? After the 2000 earthquakes, you've used the opportunity of reconstruction to introduce new models of development. It was your first term as mayor then, I believe, and you've been re-elected, I guess, consecutively since then. Tell me, what are the unique features that allowed for the financing of this effort? Were there hurdles that you overcame? Did it come easy? How did you do it?
Gracias. Saludos a todas y a todas. El impacto del terremoto nos afectó a todos. 25,000 personas desplazadas, el 40% de la infraestructura seriamente dañada de toda la ciudad y, por supuesto, pérdidas de cientos de vidas. La primera decisión que tomamos fue básicamente, a partir del desastre, tomar la oportunidad de reconstruir una mejor ciudad, de atender la emergencia, pero también de plantearnos la transformación de nuestro municipio, Santa Tecla. Y así se lo comunicamos a todos los tecleños y tecleñas. Les dijimos que no se fueran, que no vendieran, que no alquilaran, que íbamos a volver a levantar esa ciudad y que lo íbamos a hacer nosotros, porque teníamos capacidad, porque teníamos empuje para no solo atender las medidas de emergencia, sino poner a Santa Tecla nuevamente en la ruta de una ciudad altamente competitiva. Y eso es básicamente lo que hicimos, mandar un mensaje de confianza, de confianza. Y eso nos permitió que mucha gente entendiera y se incorporara plenamente a todos los esfuerzos de corto y de mediano plazo. Segundo, este proceso de reconstrucción acelerada y de transformación de la ciudad requería también del aporte y la participación de todos. Hicimos un llamado al sector privado, a los actores económicos municipales y a los que venían invirtiendo en el municipio y les dijimos que mantuvieran su actividad económica, que mantuvieran su inversión. Sacamos un acuerdo básico con todos esos actores pequeños y grandes de mantener el esfuerzo en invertir en Santa Tecla. Y eso nos permitió que ellos nos acompañaran en toda la reconstrucción, pero también en el proceso de transformación que lleva ya 10 años. El actor económico entendió perfectamente sobre la base de un acuerdo público-privado. Tercero, hicimos una agresiva gestión de cooperación internacional y esa cooperación la incorporamos a este proceso de reconstrucción. Ayudó básicamente a acelerar el proceso de reconstrucción. Lo hicimos de manera correcta, oportuna. Tratamos de que esa cooperación, por pequeño o grande que fuera, impactara directamente en el objetivo que teníamos, que era levantar rápidamente el municipio y ponerlo en la ruta del desarrollo. Cuarto, un intenso cabildeo para que además de todos los recursos locales económicos que estábamos incorporando, un intenso cabildeo para negociar más recursos del gobierno nacional que sumara a este esfuerzo de responder a la demanda de recursos logísticos y económicos que son importantes no solo en el corto plazo, porque la parte del corto plazo es clave para lo que viene en el mediano plazo. El otro aspecto importante fue decirle a los ciudadanos que, a pesar de la crisis, no nos dejaran de pagar los impuestos, que teníamos que seguir pagando los impuestos, porque era la única manera en cómo íbamos a poner la mayor cantidad de recursos al servicio de la recuperación del municipio. Y por último, lo que hicimos también fue básicamente no quedarnos en la emergencia. El compromiso nuestro fue, además de atender la emergencia, era construir un plan estratégico de cómo queríamos ver la ciudad en 10 años. El plan estratégico nuestro termina en el 2012, en su primera versión. Y ahora, 10 años después del terremoto, Santa Tecla está colocada como la segunda ciudad en desarrollo humano. Santa Tecla, que mantenemos la memoria del impacto del terremoto, pero además ese plan estratégico nos ha permitido incorporar toda una nueva visión de cómo construir ciudad y de cómo este enfoque de la gestión del riesgo a desastre tiene que ser un elemento transversal que sea trabajado de manera permanente, porque es la única manera de bajar costos y de impactar de manera positiva en el futuro que queremos para nuestras ciudades.
Fascinating. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I'm sure we're going to get back to lots of details that you have mentioned here, but particularly that what struck me is what you said about moving quickly out of the emergency phase. But I'm wondering if later you could think about what would it need, how important is the recovery plan, how to be integrated in any projects for after disaster. Thank God that you were able to rebuild the city. Let me now introduce, I think, my last panelist, Mr. Nirankar Saxena. He's the director of the Federation of Indian Chambers of Commerce and Industry. He heads the Business Information Services Network division at the FICCI, and he manages multiple project portfolios. His responsibilities include networking with leading senior government officials, industrialists, and diplomatic corps in India, as well as the visiting foreign dignitaries. Mr. Saxena works towards the cause of disaster management in India and works very closely with associations such as National Disaster Management Authority of India. FICCI, as an apex industry association in the country, has chosen disaster management as a pronounced focus area, not only for the attention of the industrial sector, but also for statutory agencies, NGOs, district and state authorities. Welcome. Mr. Saxena, India's economy has grown very fast in recent years, as we all know, although not everyone has benefited. Given the recognized link between poverty and the risk of disasters, from your experience, what incentives are there for the private sector to invest in risk reduction as it's happening now in India?
Thank you, Excellencies on the dais. I'd like to first introduce my organization. Federation of Indian Chambers of Commerce of Industry is an apex industry association in India. It's a business association, it's a family of 300,000 companies we heads, which includes large, small, medium, and small companies. We at FICCI has chosen disaster management as a pronounced focus area, not only for the attention of industrial sector, but also for statutory agencies, NGOs, districts, and state authorities, and our central government. Coming to your questions, I do agree. Indian economy has been growing at an enormous rate of 8% annually, on an average of over previous decade. As per the World Bank, India is on track of record of growth rate of approximately 9% in 2007. This makes India the second fastest growing economy in the world after China. The Goldman Sachs reports states that India GDP will reach very soon USD 1 trillion, 2 trillion by 2020, $6 trillion by 2032, and $10 trillion by 2038, and $27 trillion by 2050. This is an exceptional that India will have a GDP growth rate of 9%, and is expected that within a 1.5 decade, India will significantly reduce the gap between the rich and the poor. There are issues which are of concern. These are poverty, mitigation, health, education, childcare, and sustainable development. We at FICCI, under our disaster management activity, is initiating and promoting public-private partnership-based model of disaster management, especially during the offset emergency plan under PPP. We work very closely with National Disaster Management Authority, Government of India, under Ministry of Home, in publicizing and circulating their comprehensive guidelines on various disasters they have issued. And under awareness, we organize national and international conferences on industrial disaster management in a proximity of hub of major accident hazard location. In India, recently we have seen increase in the investment in risk reduction, and thanks to the Government of India in setting up a National Disaster Mitigation Fund. We are promoting public-private partnership, finances through insurance, and microfinances. Let me give you a brief on each. National Disaster Mitigation Fund is set up by the federal government. The onus of deciding the grant is decided by National Disaster Management Authority after proper assessment of disaster-affected areas. Disaster management committees constitute of elected representatives, civil societies, civil defense volunteers, and government functionaries, which has been constituted at all levels, including village, urban, local bodies, and ward levels. The National Disaster Mitigation Fund is also used for earthquake retrofitting, building roads, connectivity, cyclone shelter, etc. That is one. Second, on the public-private partnership, which is growing an upcoming business opportunity for corporate and private sector in India, is proving a key constraint in sustaining and expanding India economic growth and ensuring that all Indians are able to share its benefit. I'll again repeat that on public-private partnership through the private sector, on expanding Indian economic growth, we are ensuring all Indians are share to its benefit.
I will be coming back to you, but I can't give you more time than the others.
Just
so
1 minute.
Not even 1 minute. You have 20 seconds.
Okay. Under public-private partnership, I'd like to inform the August audience that currently $20 billion worth of projects are under development. The PPP are relatively an upcoming vibrant business opportunity in India. Third, finances through insurance on pre-disaster risk financing through insurance and post-disaster is a major initiative which our insurance companies are taking. And microfinance for disaster risk reduction. With these, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Let me try to have an interactive discussion here. Mr. Minister, let me bring to your attention something and see where we can go from here. If you would all agree, the disaster has a very short-lived span of life in the memory of people. In traditionally, people sort of think, well, it comes every blue moon. They don't remember disasters. They expect that they will not come any frequently than they had dreamt they wouldn't. And yet we have a growing sense of citizenry. Citizens are now, they are aware, they are thinking that, yes, they have to oppose a new nuclear plant. Yes, an oil spill is their business. Yes, that there have to be, they are more aware of climate change. How can we build on the readiness of the citizen, the new citizen? How can we build on that? And how can we work on agitating a better remembrance and memory of disaster so that we could reduce the risks?
I don't know whether I want to say Malaysia is lucky or not, but we have floods every year. It's a perennial problem, which means that the public in Malaysia will always remember that there's going to be flood every year. But of course, awareness amongst the citizens is very important. That is why awareness program for us is top of the agenda, and we have also include natural disasters as part of the curriculum in the education system. So I feel that by doing this, we can always remind the citizens that you know, disaster is a problem which can come to you anytime, and that you must be prepared for it.
Do you feel that you have done enough, or do you feel that the citizen and the private sector are coming with you on the issue of the risk and vulnerability assessment that is terribly needed before they go on from here? Did they learn the unfortunate lesson, I must say, or do they still want the quick fix-it?
I can only speak on behalf of Malaysia. In Malaysia, certainly, the public, they don't want a quick fix solution. They know that this is a problem for us to face. As I've said earlier, we face the flood almost every year, and sometimes twice a year. So they are always aware, and we are lucky because we have good cooperation from the private sector. They have got their corporate social responsibility, and as I've said, I only speak for Malaysia, and it is not a problem for us.
Mayor Ortiz, do you have the same experience? Have you had any resistance, or did you have always resilience?
Bueno, nuestra experiencia es que el golpe fue tan duro que tuvimos que reflexionar profundamente. Y a partir de ahí, lo primero que hicimos fue básicamente planificar nuestra ciudad a largo plazo, pero poner en el centro un tema que es clave, es la educación. El tema de la educación y el tema de la memoria. Y esto lo hemos venido trabajando en los últimos 10 años con la misma fuerza con que hemos impulsado la política de gestión del riesgo a desastres a nivel local y con la misma fuerza que hemos movilizado todos los recursos económicos para levantar la ciudad, porque siempre hemos dicho, de nada sirve que seamos capaces de levantarnos bien de una tragedia si no somos capaces de sensibilizar y concientizarnos los ciudadanos que mucho de lo que nos podemos ahorrar en costos en el futuro inmediato o a mediano plazo, porque siempre hay que estar convencidos que vamos a tener un evento, no importa de qué tipo, pero un evento siempre va a haber. Y el menor costo ante ese evento posible es prepararnos. Y ahí la educación juega un papel fundamental. Es lo que hemos estado haciendo nosotros con las escuelas, es lo que hemos estado haciendo con los centros de trabajo, es lo que hemos estado haciendo con nuestra estructura política administrativa, y es lo que hemos estado haciendo porque creemos que no se trata de vivir del pasado, pero no se puede olvidar. Y ahí hemos también levantado un buen sistema de estadísticas, porque cuando el impacto nos agarró en Santa Tecla, no teníamos estadísticas. Nosotros creíamos que vivíamos en una ciudad segura. Y cuando fuimos a ver los datos históricos, en 1917 ya había habido un terremoto similar que había impactado el 70% de la ciudad. Entonces, el tema de las estadísticas locales, territoriales, también es importante porque son un buen soporte técnico, jurídico, científico, que nos permite tomar las mejores decisiones.
Ms. Georgieva, what do you then say? Is it important for you to assess to take into account that we need to assess memory, or do we only assess vulnerability? Where, you are in charge of thinking of how to put hands together and avoid a repetition. Do you factor these things in?
Well, I mean, it is.
Sorry.
Thank you. In Europe, we are a family of 27 countries. On many issues, we have diverse opinions. But there is this one issue of disaster response, acting as one, where our citizens are absolutely united. 93% of the Europeans believe that we should act decisively in the face of disaster, either at home or abroad. And we also know the economics of disasters. We know that every dollar, my former employer, the World Bank, calculated that every dollar spent in disaster risk reduction brings $4 to $7 in benefits. And yet, it appears that we still cannot translate this into action. We are a little bit like, like the individuals that, that if you don't exercise, this brings high health risk, but you don't exercise. And the question is why? And of course, we can have a very rich discussion on that, but I want to point out to three things. The first one is the point you made that once the disaster is over and the cameras move away, we lose focus that it may come again. Next year, the floods will be here again. Secondly, many of the disaster risk reduction measures are not win-win. They are, the society may win, the city may win, but the landowner may lose. And there is, of course, opposition from those who are on the losing end of these measures, especially in land management. In Europe, this is in flood management. And a third issue that I think is very important for us to grasp with is that we need a fairly comprehensive system for disaster prevention, disaster risk reduction to work. We need institutions, we need standards, we need respect for the standards, and that is a horizontal transformation that has to happen across the board. You cannot pin it to one agency, one single agency, and expect it to deliver.
Thank you. Sorry, we have to do this. We couldn't get an independent mic. Mr. Oum, do you, from your point of view, do you feel that the financial crisis has allowed countries to hide behind it as a pretext and not put the disaster risk reduction as a priority, particularly when aid is going to the most vulnerable countries?
Yes, I agree. I think this financial issues should really drive this, because at the end of the day, people listen to the money. And as one of the panelists mentioned, that we do all have very short-term memory. So when the disasters hit, then we think about it, but then we forget about it a year later. So it's very important for the public sector to have long-term memory. And this is where Georgieva's the numbers about $1 investment yields $7 return in terms of in terms of the disaster preparedness. Now, why this is such an obvious math? If you invest early and you get more back from this, but why are we doing this? And we're thinking perhaps maybe we're preaching to the wrong group. People who actually, people here are pretty much all converted. We need people who control money and people who control the development agenda. So, we do have a practical experience in this in ADB. When we try to double and triple our clean energy investment, we stopped talking to the energy people because energy people knew the stuff. We invited the Ministry of Finance and Ministry of Development, put them together with the private sector and energy colleagues to convince the people with the money and the development agenda. So they need to convert. So as a result of this, we were able to triple the investment in terms of clean energy, because the people who control the money can put the agenda of disaster risk reduction as part of the development agenda and properly finance it right away.
Speaking of financing, Mr. Saxena, I know that I've learned from you that there's a bill in front of the Parliament now that its purpose is to generate resources, and it has a compulsory 2% of the profits from the private sector going for the issue, for a fund together with the government, I believe. Can you very quickly shed light on this experience or this experiment, and do you think that this bill will pass in Parliament? Is this the first of its kind?
Yeah, in India, we have a Ministry of Corporate Affairs, and we have, as an industry chamber, a business chamber, trying to get a policy change in our country to request all our private sectors, companies to invest 2% of their profits in the corporate social responsibilities. What we feel that for any disaster risk reduction activities in the countries, you require financial resources. And to pool in such resources, such kind of initiative, such kind of new approach which our government is taking will going to help us. And it's a business opportunity for our private sectors also to work with the government to build on disaster risk reduction. This table is likely to get tabled in the Parliament and soon get clear, and it's of its own kind in the world, where corporates will be directed to invest 2% of their profits in the corporate social responsibility.
I also understand that you have some very interesting technologies that one is called disruptive technologies for disaster risk reduction. For example, by recharging flood water. I hope that we get the opportunity to touch on that as part of your policy. But let me do something now. Let me take a few short comments and short questions from the audience, and then I will come back to the panel, and then we'll have it more interactive. And please just put your sign up so that I know who is asking for the floor, as it's not easy to field such a lovely room. I see, do I see a hand up there? Yes, please, the gentleman up there. Go ahead. Would you kindly then identify yourself? And please make it short, as you know, this is a rather quick move.
I'm Santosh Kumar from Government of India delegation. Just two questions to the distinguished panelists. One is this regarding European Union and also ADB. We have been talking about this financing and also that conditionalities. We need to know that whether this conditionality is getting transformed into a kind of a safeguard for making any investment for any of the projects, the development projects, as well as the disaster management projects. Number two, the financial tools which we are actually looking forward, that what kind of a financial tools which can be taken up for the disaster risk reduction, where the private sector can pitch in. And any of these countries, when we are talking about that, where the reconstruction has taken place so far, and how it is actually have the demonstration effect in other development projects of the same city. Meaning thereby that it doesn't, if once this recovery is over, that things stop there, but doesn't get translated into the development planning of the same city. So the question is that how it is the plan or the strategy to actually rebuild once by the donor as well as also by the different government agencies. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I take it that both questions are for Mr. Or did you want, well, he left the floor. All right, Mr. I think one of them is yours.
Yeah, let me start and others can chip in. I heard you ask a question about possibility of making this part of the safeguards. The disaster risk reduction issues are increasingly being mainstreamed into our operation. And in terms of the safeguard issues, we normally look at environment and social safeguards, but we did include this as part of the rapid environment assessment checklist to make sure that certain aspects are looked into for disaster risk when we do a project. But that's obviously not enough. We need to make sure that the disaster risk reduction activities are done at very much upstream at the planning stage. So, and this is where we haven't done that much yet. So this is where we need to scale up, and we need to ask the government of India to ask us to do this at the country dialogue at the development stage.
The lady up front, please identify yourself.
Thank you very much, facilitator. The issue which we are discussing is about economics of disaster, and I think this is extremely important. Now, my question, which is going to come from my comment, is about who benefits and how much goes really to the target group of who benefits and how much goes to the rural disaster. If you are responding, perhaps the mayor of Otis, by the way, I didn't identify myself. I'm from the African Union Commission. I'm from the African Union Commission. I would like to get the mayor, that is Mayor Otis, maybe to respond to my question. When disaster strikes, a lot of efforts actually are put in around that table. There are many responses. I would like to maybe hear from him his kind of appreciation of this kind of situation. In most cases, the countries are not prepared. And you find that the coordination efforts are very limited as far as the country level is concerned. So the resources collected, the resources pledged, how much of that, has there been an accountability, has there been an evaluation, an assessment, as how much actually goes to the real problem?
Mayor Otis, please.
Bueno, por la experiencia nuestra y las experiencias que he conocido en la región centroamericana, hay 3 elementos que son clave para poder movilizar, gestionar, articular, coordinar cualquier cantidad de recursos. La primera es una plataforma planificada de la ciudad. Todos sabemos que en esa plataforma, si no estamos claros qué queremos con ese territorio, si no estamos claros a dónde vamos con ese territorio, si no estamos claros cuáles son las prioridades que estamos estableciendo en ese territorio, lo más seguro es que cualquiera va a llegar y nos va a impresionar, cualquiera va a llegar, va a aportar de manera dispersa, de manera atomizada, y posiblemente no exista una suma de recursos de manera ordenada, que es lo que muchas veces ha pasado en situaciones donde hemos tenido experiencia en la región centroamericana, y el caso de Santa Tecla lo dice. Desde que nosotros establecimos claramente a dónde queríamos tener la ciudad en 10 años, eso nos facilitó y ha sido una gran plataforma para que tanto las operaciones privadas, las operaciones públicas nacionales, como las operaciones de la cooperación internacional puedan verse en una perspectiva de valor agregado. Segundo, tiene que ver mucho con las capacidades del receptor y del gestor. Si uno tiene un gobierno local débil, si uno tiene un gobierno local sin institucionalidad, si uno tiene un gobierno local sin un liderazgo claro de qué es lo que quiere transformar, lo que vamos a tener básicamente es, de seguro, es que alguien va a imponer las reglas. O la impone un privado o la impone un cooperante. Lo cierto es que es clave la capacidad local, la capacidad del territorio. La contraparte debe tener unas capacidades instaladas, tanto en materia de liderazgo como en materia de instrumentales, no solo para ejecutar bien, sino para tener la capacidad de saber a dónde gestionar, al corto, mediano y largo plazo. Y tercero, el tema ahora ya no es solamente si me quieren ayudar o no, el tema es un gana-gana. La alianza pública-privada es un gana-gana. No es una ventaja para un actor y una desventaja para otro actor. Me pongo de acuerdo contigo en el sentido de que el hecho no es que yo voy a llegar a decirle a un actor privado, ayúdeme. Sí, te puede ayudar a cortísimo plazo. Te puede ayudar por una situación terrible de emergencia como la que pasa una semana después o un mes después, incluso unos 2 meses después de una gran tragedia. Pero si no hay una oferta clara, si no hay una propuesta clara de proceso después, simple y sencillamente, si el actor privado ve que no tiene un entorno que le posibilite sostenibilidad o crecimiento en su negocio, simple y sencillamente busca cualquier justificación para retirarse. He ahí el liderazgo público, he ahí la capacidad de interpretar y de saber cómo esa alianza pública-privada puede tener unas facilidades, puede tener unos beneficios que al final impacten positivamente a la ciudad. Si la ciudad se recupera bien, el privado gana. Si el privado sale bien, el actor público crece. Y en ese sentido, esa es la operación que creo que está planteada. Ahora, y cierro con esto, aquí hay un reto, y el reto fundamental es que son los nuevos desafíos, es que lo que se nos dice ahora, que si queremos tener una gestión exitosa de los riesgos a desastres, tiene que haber un esfuerzo dirigido en los próximos 5 años a fortalecer las capacidades locales. Si no fortalecemos capacidades locales, cualquier esfuerzo que se haga desde la parte central siempre será menos impacto o de menos valor agregado.
Thank you very much. I have 3 interventions. I'd like them also crisp and directed to the person you want to answer them. I have one from the Red Cross, another one from Indonesia, and a third one from the representative of China for the moment. I'll take those 3 and then I'll see what I'm going to be doing next. Now, please, the representative of the Red Cross.
Thank you. This is Umesh Takal, Executive Director, Nepal Red Cross Society, and part of the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies delegation. I just would like to make a brief comment. We are talking about economics, cost, and benefits. So I would like to make a brief comment on that. No one can disagree about the importance of investing in communities, investing for better today and, of course, better tomorrow. we need evidence-based approach to calculate our benefits of the cost that we have involved. And the strategy of the Federation 2020 very much highlights on the importance of evidence-based approach and building resilience to the communities. So to that end, we have developed a cost-benefit analysis tool, and we have done this study in several countries around the globe, and we also did one in Nepal. And from that, we have revealed that if you invest $1 for disaster risk reduction, then you can yield the benefits of about $90 in our case, which in itself is a great result that we have achieved. And from all this cost-benefit analysis and evidence-based approach, what we have concluded is that prevention is always better than cure. And prevention is, the process of cost-benefit analysis is worth more than the numerical results. And we are achieving more outcomes than the outputs. And then transparent dialogue with all stakeholders is must. Our strategic approach primarily is our effort to strengthen transparency, accountability, openness, participation, efficiency, and effectiveness. With that comment, I just would like to end by posing a question to everyone. We have capacity, we have strength, we have evidences, we can deliver. Then why not we are investing long-term or adequate investment are there by the governments, by the banks, by interagencies, multi-agencies to yield benefits of their economics and humanitarian investments to build resilient communities.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I appreciate it. Now, I'd like that the panel holds that thought, because I'm going to just take a couple more interventions and then get back to you, since this was addressed to the whole panel. We'll see who's going to want to take this question first. But let me take a shorter intervention, hopefully, from the representative of Indonesia and then the representative of China, and then I'll manage to see if I could get in here a little more. Please, the representative of Indonesia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Actually, I would like to raise this question on the ADB and the Malaysia, and of course the mayor, about the role of the DRR investment here, because I think it's going to be very much rely on the three actors here: the government, the private sectors, or the community, and also the international community. On the government, of course, like yesterday, the President of Indonesia mentioned that 10 times from 2008 to 2010 investment on the disaster, but that's only in the responsibility of the government. But the private sector is not really, significant yet, yeah, in covering or investing in DRR, including the community resilience, because the community is also very important to be taken into account as the contributors for the investment of the DRR. And then the international community, including the donor bilaterally as well as multilateral donors such as EU or also the ADB, because we are thinking here that, for instance, like Indonesia now is becoming the G20 members and also the middle income countries, which is very much rely on, not again with the grant. But since we are talking about the investment of the DRR, I think the thing is still very obvious, the requirements or the needs for the investment on the DRR by the assistance from the international assistance. And the next things I would like to
raise, please,
actually,
it's only in fairness to others. Honestly, I can't give you more than I gave the panelists, so you really need to help me out, because I don't want to be rude, but I may be obliged to. Please wrap up.
Okay, thank you.
Finish your thought, please.
Okay. About the next is about very short about the DRR-oriented recovery plan, because most of the example given is on the post-disaster, and I think it's going to be very important for the community, including the donors, to have this kind of like DRR-oriented or DRR-focused recovery process, which is not really obvious or significant in terms of the assistance as well as the funding assistance to the developing countries.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Again, the panel, please take notes so that we can divide labor on answering or responding to these points. Very important interventions. The representative of China, please. You have the floor.
谢谢主席。就是印度的贸工部的这个负责人刚才提到了减灾融资的问题， 提到了4个比较我感兴趣的手段。第一个呢是建立国家一级的减灾基金。第二个提到了呢就是这个减灾金融保险融资。第3个提到了就是 PPP。第4个呢提到了这个小额信贷 （microfinance）。这个呢就是印度的很多的情况跟中国非常相似。印度的代表呢，刚才呢没有时间详细阐述这4个方面的一些具体的做法。中国呢，实际上在这4个方面呢，也是有相似的一些结构。我是希望印度的这个报告员呢，能够多提一下这个关于减灾金融融资以及小额信贷方面的一些做法。这样子呢，我们2方面也可以加强一些交流。谢谢。
Thank you very much. I have 2 more speakers who have asked for the floor, but I'd rather just take 1 round of answers, then get back to the floor again. So my apologies to the representative of Madagascar and Mauritania. I'll get back to you in the next round. So let me take it. No, are you ready or not yet? Please, Mr. Om.
Oui, merci beaucoup d'avoir me donné la parole.
Can I go? I can go? Yeah. Yeah, there's several questions that...
Please get the mic closer to you because we're having a hard time hearing you. Thank you.
Yeah, related to what ADB or multilateral international development community can do for helping the countries to better prepare. We do have a huge program every year that, for example, in ADB, we have an annual lending of about $17 billion a year. And that's just the money that goes out. But in order for us to invest that money, we need to have a very, very detailed dialogue with the individual countries. And obviously, 15 billion is not enough to take care of all the development agenda. So we do mobilize the private investment. And in order to attract the private investment, we do need to work on the risks, identify the risks which we need to address. And private sector investment will not come in unless we remove the risks that they cannot manage. So our role in this area is that we work with the governments to create an enabling environment by creating the regulatory certainty, providing the legislation and capacity development so that the private sector colleagues can come in and rely on the government system. And also at the project level, we do need to take care of some of the investments that public sector needs to deal with, and some of the rural-related issues. It's very difficult for private sector to come in. But there's a huge scope for private sector intervention in the urban development, as well as some of the energy sector, for example, where in the past we worried mostly about the financials, the economics, and technology, but the disaster have to come in at the designing stage. And I do remember in one particular situation that the project that I worked on in the hydropower, we did work on protecting the watershed for this particular project, but at that time the project developers did that to be nice to the environment. But in fact, this is a must now in order to protect their assets. You have to remember, if there's no water, there's no energy for hydropower. So this type of awareness also need to be implanted in our development program.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. Mr. Aziz, please, you have the floor.
Yes, I would like to respond to my colleague from Indonesia. I think when it comes to national or natural disaster, it is the absolute responsibility, not absolute, we can share with the private sector, but it is a national government which must take the lead, because the national government is the only entity that has the influence and the strength to collect money apart from their own money that we have. In Malaysia, for example, when there's a natural disaster which occur, it is always the national government which will start to have the fund. We have our own national disaster fund, and from there the private sector will have their own fund, they collect money, and once they collected all the money, they will transfer to the National Disaster Fund. So what I'm trying to say here, that the buck stops with the national government. The national government must take the lead. The rest will follow. And of course, I agree that there must be, joint partnership with the private sector, but absolutely, the national government must take full responsibility before you expect others to do so.
I will exceed my role as a moderator and applaud this point. Now, Ms. Georgieva, and then you will take the floor. Let me give the floor to Madam Georgieva. Yes, please. There you go.
It is very important for the international community, the international financial organizations, the bilateral donors like the European Commission, to support three types of actions. The first one is to make sure that poor and rich countries alike have equal access to good weather forecasts, to information that is absolutely paramount for people to respond, to anticipate and to be able to respond to disasters. And that is something that obviously we have to work on in a comprehensive way. It is unfortunately still the case that for some, small communities, for farmers, I'm thinking of Niger right now, thinking of the risks of a drought last year, that information doesn't quite come quickly enough. It is not accessible by everybody. Secondly, we have an obligation to support drought resistance crops, to support measures that can be applied so communities can withstand disasters better. And again, it is a global obligation. We should not ask each country to strive to achieve this objective. And third, we must support more exchange of sharing of knowledge, learning from each other. And by the way, not necessarily developing countries learning from developed countries learning from developing countries, all of us learning from each other so we can collectively face the challenges that are becoming more profound in a way that we are, as a global community, better equipped.
Please go ahead, Mr. Ortiz. It's okay.
Como este es un debate y además la tendencia en los últimos decenios ha sido básicamente que la estructura que ha funcionado para abordar este tipo de temas ha sido una estructura dominantemente central. Yo le llamo una estructura y una cultura central o centralizada y centrista. Por eso yo relativizo lo que se dice, que el principal responsable es el gobierno central. Claro que los gobiernos centrales tienen un papel importantísimo en el liderazgo. Pero aquí yo creo que el nuevo paradigma es la capacidad que tengamos para construir verdaderas capacidades en las ciudades. Si en el futuro queremos abordar de manera más integral situaciones que vamos a vivir, hay que tener ciudades fuertes. Hay que tener ciudades con capacidad de respuesta. Hay que tener ciudades con capacidad de articular, de coordinar, de gestionar. Hay que tener liderazgos que sepan cómo actuar en el corto plazo, pero también cómo integrar situaciones de crisis a factores de oportunidad. Yo pongo el ejemplo nuestro. Yo creo que si Santa Tecla se hubiera quedado con la fórmula del gobierno central de ese momento, quizás nos hubiera llevado 5 años o 7 años más en recuperarnos. Incluso se dijo en algún momento que nosotros no teníamos derecho a gestionar absolutamente nada, que lo iba a hacer el gobierno central. Y no estoy hablando aquí de un problema de izquierdas, de derechas, de centro, no. Solo estoy diciendo que el nuevo paradigma se sienta en 3 cosas. Primero, en los próximos 5 o 10 años, capacidades locales para responder de mejor manera a lo que se viene. 2, un nuevo compromiso ciudadano. Los ciudadanos tienen que ser parte de este gran esfuerzo y de este gran enfoque, y de manera activa, no de manera pasiva. una ciudad que el ciudadano le dé la espalda a una situación de crisis, simple y sencillamente no hay mucho que hacer. Y tercero, unas nuevas reglas del juego entre lo central y lo local, porque esto tiene que ser una capacidad de articulación internivel, interinstitucional. No es que yo pienso y tú actúas. Lo local piensa, actúa y construye y articula con el otro nivel. Y cierro con lo siguiente. El debate que estamos haciendo ahora requiere unas nuevas reglas del juego para el financiamiento, desde la cooperación internacional, pero también dentro de los presupuestos nacionales. Nosotros ahora, como ciudad resiliente en desarrollo, hemos incorporado al presupuesto municipal una partida para la gestión de los riesgos a desastre. Y, por ejemplo, en cada año fiscal, este año 2011, del total de la inversión pública que vamos a hacer, el 15% va directamente a impactar obras y proyectos que nos permitan una gestión del riesgo mucho más fuerte. ¿Qué quiere decir eso? Que yo creo que una forma, y perdón, solo cierro con esto, que es otro tema también que hay que discutir, cuál es el papel de la cooperación. Porque nosotros decíamos en el proceso, bueno, ¿y la cooperación nos va a resolver el problema? No. Los gobiernos locales, centrales, nos debemos de dar cuenta que el problema de la sostenibilidad en la gestión del desastre es una responsabilidad nuestra, de los actores. La cooperación internacional que debe replantearse nos puede ayudar y contribuir a acelerar procesos, a intensificar procesos, pero no hay nada que hacer si nosotros no estamos convencidos de lo que estamos haciendo. Y esa es la reflexión que quería dejar, porque creo que en el tema del financiamiento lo primero que hay que poner es dinero en el presupuesto. No importa si es poco, mucho, si es el porcentaje menor o mayor, pero hay que empezar a generar todo un concepto que en los presupuestos nacionales y locales debe haber partidas importantes que de manera transversal crucen el tema del impacto en materia de la gestión del riesgo.
It's hard to interrupt you, Mr. Ortiz. It's always very interesting, but I'm having to running very, very short on time, and I do have a few interventions, and I want to give the chance to everybody to have a say. So, Mr. Saxena, do you? I have not given you this round, but I promise to. Do you have something very quick to say on answering? Yes, indeed, indeed, you are.
Yeah. With regard to my colleague from China, I'd like to respond on the role of microfinance in disaster risk reduction in India. The attributes of disaster risk reduction are also applied in India to every household risk that are relevant for reducing risk. Microfinance and its component do help our poor people diversify their income by source and season. Microfinance also help to provide opportunity to women to earn. When there is a multiplicity of income earning opportunities, and asset building through microfinance that will help poor households in dealing with disaster better. Microfinance also provide explicit and implicit insurance to the household in India. Through in practice, these mechanisms work imperfectly. Some of the other attributes of microfinance in India, which are very helpful in dealing with large-scale disasters, are loan forgiveness or rescheduling in the area affected by disaster, better targeting of relief programs through microfinance network, better flow of information among the clientele of microfinance organization, and most important is empowerment to the women. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, so let me leave this thought with the panelists while I take a couple of questions or comments from the floor. Think kindly, each of you, after this discussion today, and you will have to do this in 1 minute each at the end. Think of the one thing you have taken away from this session, and the one thing you want to leave us with as a result of that discussion during this session. Think about it within 1 minute. You got to give me both, please. Let me now go to the representative of Madagascar, and please help me with the time. I have only 15 minutes to do all of that. The floor is yours, sir. Madagascar.
Oui, merci beaucoup d'avoir donné la parole. Ma question est essayer d'être simple. Quand un pays a subi une catastrophe, alors là, l'impact c'est vraiment énorme et on peut dire c'est multisectoriel aussi. Donc ce que Ce qu'on a constaté, donc, on a déjà mis en place le microfinance pour la reconstruction. Il y a déjà pas mal des assurances, mais aussi la contribution du gouvernement, bien sûr, c'est plutôt obligatoire. Ce que je voudrais demander, surtout à Madame représentante de l'Union européenne, c'est est-ce que possible de combiner ou bien mettre ensemble le financement de partenaires à travers de basket funds, par exemple, c'est-à-dire c'est l'Union européenne, bien la Banque mondiale ou bien les Nations unies. Donc, ce sera peut-être un peu important pour le pays, pour la reconstruction. La deuxième question, c'est pour M. Saxena, c'est-à-dire la contribution de parties privées dans la reconstruction. Est-ce qu'il est possible également de faire une basket fund parce que les dégâts, c'est plutôt multisectoriel et aussi la reconstruction, c'est multisectoriel pour avoir une priorité. Donc, est-ce qu'il est possible également de mettre en place un système de basket fund pour la mise en place de fonds de reconstruction? Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. The representative from Mauritania, please.
Bonjour tout le monde, merci Madame la Présidente. Moi j'ai un point que je voudrais mettre en valeur et une question qui est orientée à Monsieur le maire Ortiz. Bon, on a beaucoup entendu parler de la gestion et la réduction des risques et surtout la mobilisation des fonds, le déboursement et l'essai de retour à la normale. Et je n'ai pas vraiment entendu parler ou mettre en valeur un élément qui me semble vraiment très important quant à la réduction des risques, c'est le principe de la prévention et son corollaire, le principe de précaution. Et surtout quand il s'agit de prendre en considération les populations ou les souches qui sont les plus vulnérables et les plus touchées des risques et les secteurs dont ils sont liés, et là je cite l'agriculture et l'élevage, et surtout dans nos régions en Afrique. Et à cela aussi, il est nécessaire que de faire mettre en valeur le rôle que joue l'application rigide de la réglementation et surtout les évaluations environnementales, les études d'impact environnemental. Et encore, je n'ai pas beaucoup entendu vraiment parler de la synergie entre la mise en œuvre des conventions internationales dont la plupart des pays ont ratifié. La Convention des changements climatiques, la Convention de lutte contre la désertification et celle en matière de la réduction des POPs. Et je voudrais poser une question à M. le maire. C'est que l'intervention dans le domaine de crise, il y a un ensemble des acteurs. Je voudrais savoir quelle est la place accordée dans la plateforme nationale, votre plateforme, M. le maire Ortiz, la place accordée à la mairie ou le rôle que joue la mairie, surtout quand il y a un chevauchement entre le maire, le gouverneur et M. le préfet dans la réduction des risques de catastrophe. Je vous remercie.
Thank you very much. Please, Dominican Republic, really a quick intervention. I'm taking you just like an afterthought. For those three people I'll give the floor, it's got to be less than 30 seconds, please. Dominican Republic, please. Oh, where's the Dominican?
Muy buenas tardes.
Go ahead.
Teniendo en cuenta que los distinguidos panelistas están hablando a los representantes de la gestión del riesgo de la mayoría de los países del mundo y que hemos estado escuchando en este escenario una serie de recomendaciones, nos gustaría a nosotros que los distinguidos panelistas pudieran compartir con nosotros unas recomendaciones que nos permitan establecer como norma que un porcentaje de las obras de desarrollo que desarrollamos en nuestros países, de los presupuestos de obras de desarrollo, que un porcentaje de las pólizas de seguro que se cobran o se pagan en nuestros países, que ese porcentaje que se ha puesto como práctica de las utilidades del sector privado puedan ser destinados de una manera proactiva no solo a la respuesta al desastre, sino de una manera proactiva, privilegiando la prevención a obras de reducción de riesgo. haciendo una inversión equilibrada.
I really need to beg you to conclude.
O sea, haciendo una inversión equilibrada, que el dinero no se invierta en infraestructura, sino que se dedique de manera prioritaria al fortalecimiento de las capacidades. Gracias.
I thank you very much. I cannot but give the floor to the representative of the Maldives due to the fact that this is a question and an issue very much related to part of the world. 30 seconds.
Thank you very much. I have an intervention as a question. Well, I represent the Republic of Maldives Islands, so just about 3 feet above sea level. And we are talking about disasters they are considered as uncontrollable. Certainly, the need is for adaptation. So I would really need to know what are the financial mechanisms for adaptation, specifically for adaptation in Europe, as well as through other financial institutions. Thank you.
I thank you. And from the NGO world, World Vision also, please, very, very short. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, for this very important discussion. I would like to invite comments from the panelists or delegates on the floor about establishing a proactive policy climate in which external organizations, namely civil society, would be strongly encouraged or even held accountable for investments in DRR for a targeted percentage, for instance, of the total country investment.
Thank you very much. I will ask the panelists each to do the 2-minute answer and then to conclude with the 1 minute that I asked for. I think the floor is yours first, Madam Georgieva.
Or first the answer.
What do you feel? How do you feel?
I can do it. Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, we are clarifying.
2 plus 1.
2 plus 1. So that is the mandate, and now we go. The question on how we should respond to multifaceted disasters. Yes, the best way is for donors to work together with the country on a joint assessment and then contribute funding to a joint fund. We have seen after Aceh in Indonesia that a multi-donor trust fund allowed for different donors to align resources with the objectives of reconstruction. Conditions for this to work, 2. One is strong monitoring of where the money goes, because sometimes donors don't want to do that. They're afraid, I'll put it in the pool. I have no idea. It's like a black hole. I want to see transparently where money goes. And second, for the government to really be strongly, sorry to use, this is a cliche, but it is the driver's seat for the government, for the authorities, so this fund really works for people. It can be used to attract private parties. I actually would advocate strongly that we use money dedicated to disaster risk reduction to stimulate insurance, in other words, to equalize shocks of the future. And that's a long conversation, but just to the question of percent to be invested in prevention with a role for the insurance industry. Yes, the insurance industry has to work with us, with the public sector at the local level, at the national level, internationally, to help us see how we can make a pool more effective to help us all together to face the risks of the future. But again, you know, in 2 minutes I cannot exhaust that. Just a very important point for all of us. My concluding comment. What I heard in our panel this morning is that there is a very important responsibility for each and every one of us, for the international community, for the national governments, for the local authorities, for the civil society. And it is absolutely paramount that we build this global cooperation for a world that is more fragile. We have to be more agile, and it means that we work together, we identify our role, and we play it dutifully and diligently.
Help me give a hand of thanks to Madam Georgieva. Mr. You have 2 minutes for responses and 1 minute for conclusion. Thank you.
I'll do the moderator a favor. I'll cut short my response to a very short. On the question of the adaptation financing, that's the question posed in every one of these international fora. Now, it is very difficult to separate that from our development work. So, there are some adaptation financing available under Climate Investment Fund, for example. There's a specific resource there, and there's adaptation fund. But those all have to channel in through the development work of the various countries and development agencies. So, we like to request the countries to be in the driver's seat in driving this agenda forward. In terms of the concluding remark, based on the discussions, we do need to really mainstream our disaster risk reduction work in every one of our agenda, whether you're a country, whether you're a development bank or a private sector. And we do need to put the activities forward, move from reactive to proactive. And we do need to bring in the private sector to the heavy lifting for us.
And for Mr. Please, help me thank him for his great contribution. Mr. Saxena, please.
Yeah, from the private sector is highly necessary for the local economic development. The local economic development is a process by which public, businesses, and non-governmental sectors partners work collectively create better conditions for economic growth and employment generation. The purpose of local economic development program is to build up the economic capacity of an area to improve its economic future and the quality of life for all. The perspective of the local economic development is an excellent viewpoint from which to address the issue of serving people, as it focus is not only on economically improving the region, but also on improving the life of people within the region. I would like to sum up my initiative that like to, from the corporate social responsibility from the private sector, encourage more participation in your respective countries. You should have a zero tolerance in disaster risk reduction from the private sector. And the most important thing is conventional technologies which manage disaster risk reduction. Time has come to think out of the box in introducing technology initiative in disaster risk reduction. We at FICCI promote technology participation in disaster risk reduction with our participation with Department of Science and Technology, Government of India, and various technical institutes, and share these experiences with industries to implement those solutions for disaster risk reduction. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Saxena. Mr. Minister, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to conclude by saying that the financing and effective reduction of disaster risk requires a joint response from the private and public sectors. As complexity and cost rise, neither group can meet the challenge alone. This is particularly true for emerging economies that lack funds, yet must also deal with the increasing frequency and severity of natural disasters. Moreover, as the underlying risk exposure increases, the inflation-adjusted cost of future events could far exceed the limited government budget. Another point to note is that, besides relying totally on government funding, it is suggested that companies and corporations contribute by playing their industry role as part of their corporate social responsibility and sustainability. And the best way to maintain that trust is to build a history of capable, sincere behavior through active and strategic corporate social responsibility. In view of the above, the following points are put forward for consideration. 1, public and private sector finance and global climate change adaptation. 2, issuance of generic bonds and other financial tools by private sector. 3, global research and development on risk management with emphasis on DRR and GCCA. Education. 4, and global training funds on risk management with emphasis on DRR and GCCA. 5, global risk management insurance scheme. 6, global risk management information system. 7, venture capital and commercial loans. 8, global environment facility trust fund. 9, global facility for DRR and climate change adaptation. 10, Global Trust Fund for GCCA, and lastly, 11, support from bilateral donors worldwide. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister Aziz. Thank you for your contribution. The last word will go to Mayor Mortis.
Gracias. Una respuesta en dos direcciones. Primero a la pregunta. Estábamos más concentrados en el tema de financiamiento, pero el papel del territorio, el papel de los gobiernos municipales o ayuntamientos, como le queramos llamar. Yo siempre he dicho que en la región centroamericana y en América Latina, si tenemos ciudades fuertes, vamos a tener países fuertes. Si tenemos ciudades viables, vamos a tener países estables. Si tenemos ciudades preparadas para enfrentar situaciones no previstas, vamos a tener países con una mayor capacidad de articular e integrar. De hecho, los municipios, los territorios tenemos responsabilidad de primer nivel en este desafío. Hay que tomarlo, no hay que pedirle permiso a nadie ahora, porque el tiempo no nos da y además no nos van a dar permiso, porque hay que romper con un enfoque y un esquema tradicional de cómo se han venido haciendo las cosas por años. Hay que romperlo de manera positiva. Hay que generar correlación, concertación, articulación en todos los niveles. Pero así como somos el gobierno de primera grada, de primer nivel, tiene que ser también la instancia de primer nivel para enfrentar situaciones poniendo en el centro la prevención. Y la prevención tiene que ver con políticas públicas locales articuladas con políticas públicas nacionales. La prevención tiene que ver con la planificación estratégica. La planificación tiene que ver con la construcción de ciudadanía, la prevención con la construcción de ciudadanía tiene que ver con el liderazgo. Hay que construir un nuevo liderazgo con un nuevo enfoque. Y este tema es central para la sostenibilidad de nuestras ciudades. Hay que tomar el tema, hay que asumir el tema y hay que gestionar el tema, porque es parte de la seguridad de nuestras ciudades y de nuestra gente. Al final, todos los desastres pasan en las ciudades y todas las pérdidas se producen en nuestras ciudades. Por lo tanto, el liderazgo local no le puede dar la espalda a este tipo de cosas. Yo creo que ha llegado el momento de asumirlo con la responsabilidad que se debe. Yo hago 4 llamados, 4 recomendaciones. El primero, que todos los gobiernos locales, a partir de esta plataforma, tenemos que empezar a trabajar seriamente por integrar en el buen gobierno el tema de la gestión del riesgo a desastres. Aquel gobierno que no integre este tema no puede tener una gestión de buen gobierno. Segundo, hay que descentralizar competencias y recursos. Y los gobiernos centrales tienen que entender que ellos solos y de la manera tradicional no vamos a gestionar de mejor manera las situaciones que se nos vienen. Tercero, hay que implementar unos nuevos mecanismos de cómo financiar desde lo local con creatividad, pero tomando en cuenta que aquí la principal responsabilidad es del actor público, del gestor público, que tiene que ser capaz de movilizar recursos privados, de alianzas públicas privadas, por supuesto, y también de recursos internacionales, ya sean vía donación o préstamo, pero siempre pensando que es el actor público el que puede generar los mejores espacios para esto. Y por último, es el llamado algo, no todo es dinero, aunque el dinero es importante, es el tipo de ciudades que queremos construir. El tema es el siguiente, yo creo que en todos los municipios o ciudades deberíamos de obligar a que haya una materia para nuestros chicos, para nuestros jóvenes, obligada de gestión de riesgos a desastres, porque yo creo que el tema es tan central que ya no se puede abordar de manera sesgada. Gracias.
Thank you very much. Well, with this, I would have concluded my part of the program. I thought it was an amazing discussion, but I shall leave the comments of this discussion to the Deputy Secretary General. But I thank you for your tolerance and acceptance of my very rigid running of the show. Thank you very much, Madam. Please.
Our hands together for our moderator. Thank you very much, Mr. Gum, for so ably conducting this session. You were very good. It has enabled us to finish in time, and that is important. I wouldn't really hazard doing another summary of the very good conclusions that were made by our panelists, but I'd like to take this opportunity to thank all of you. One of the, I should say, some of the key recommendations, the ones that you have given will definitely be taken to the chair's summary. This will be done. But I do realize that what we shall need to do is to continue to deepen our understanding of planning, budgetary, accounting processes, and what type of means should be used to assist us in ensuring that DRR gets addressed. And we have heard here that the partnership between government, private sector, NGOs, CSOs is important. We need to continue with this dialogue around what constitutes effective investments that can reduce risk and what are the cost benefits. This will be important between now and our next forum, but surely there has to be action on the ground. And we have heard that governments have to be at the front and center, but the local governments are also very key in this regard. We will also have to find opportunity to better monitor spending on disaster risk reduction and thus influence future financing by using the solid framework that we still have, the Hyogo framework for action, and in particular monitoring resources that are dedicated to assist disaster risk reduction. As I said before, the central government is key, but the local communities, local authorities are really the ones who will have to be in the forefront. So with this wrapping up, I would like really to thank all of you, delegations, for your participation, to thank once again our panelists and our great moderator. Thank you very much. This session is now closed. Thank you.